Welcome to the January Pathways to Adult Success Solution Forum. Our topic this month is Engineering Student Success and Pandemic Impacted Times. We go to the next slide. So after I'm going to do a little introduction on why we need new and improved student support systems to address the times we're in. And then we have two presentations today. We're going to learn about student success systems from a great team from the GRAD Partnership. And then we're going to hear about student success coaches from Jonathan Mathis from City Year. Then we'll have an open discussion and share some resources and give some information on upcoming events. As always, we have a large and diverse group of folks from K-12 and higher ed and nonprofits. We're really asked this to be a dialogue as we go along. So please use the chat to share your ideas, your resources, ask questions as we go along. There'll be time for Q&A after each session. And then also at the end, we'll have an open discussion. And as always, the session and all the resources that are shared will be sent back out to folks that registered and also available on the Pathways to Adult Success website. So building pathways to adult success for all and with all students, right, has never been more crucial. The pandemic, as it has disrupted existing student support and guidance systems. Uncertainty is now the norm, right? We thought we were somewhere in December and we found somewhere quite different in January, right? We're all living through that constant whiplash. But what's happening, and you know, some of the recent statistics, which I'll share in a moment, are quite distressing. That it's really evident that, you know, after 2 years, it's sort of worn us all out, right? And momentum is really being sapped in the progression of students to and through post-secondaries, which really has huge implications for them, for their communities, for our society. So we're going to share it in the chat, but there was, if you haven't seen it, there was an article yesterday in Chalkbeat, and they've been looking at the available state data that's come out recently on 2021, last year's graduation rates. And they found that in 20 of 26 states they could find data for, grad rates went down. You know, we sort of were fearful of that, but that's the first real empirical evidence of that fear has been realized. It was anywhere from half a point to 2 points at the state level. So, you know, significant shift. And the most distressing thing, I think, is that those state averages are going to hide some pretty big numbers at the district level. One brief example, for example, if, you know, there's an old saying, as you know, as Peoria goes the nation. You know, Illinois as a state lost 2 points, but Peoria lost 4, right? To give you a sense that those state averages are really going to be aggregates of some areas perhaps were not quite as hard hit or had more resources to deal with the pandemic, and other areas that were much more hard hit with fewer resources. So even though state numbers are not good, they're going to be more challenging even at the district level. We know enrollment in colleges, particularly from kids from high poverty schools, are down for the second year. That key momentum from high school to college, which we know if that gets disrupted, it's really a challenge to recover from. A couple of states that report on-track data, 9th grade on-track data, Nevada and Oregon are both about 10 percentage points higher last year than prior years for kids predicted to be off track. And we know from this year, we've had reports, right, of increased course failure and chronic absenteeism, of course, in the fall. All just telling us, right, that this point that momentum has been broken, right, in many places, and we really have got to figure out how to get that back, because we know there is really no work to support a family, right, if you don't get some high school degree and some sort of post-secondary schooling or training. The momentary blip in the labor market for young adults notwithstanding, right, what for some of the kids, and we know in some ways it's pulling kids out of school, that idea of making $15 an hour would be pretty attractive as supplemental money at 17. It doesn't look good at 25 when you're trying to support a family on. And so that's another part of our challenge. So next slide. So really what we're trying to make the case here today is that we really need new and improved student support systems and structures, right? It's to enable all to thrive in these pandemic impacted times. It's not just about like, just keep doing what we were doing, because we know pre-pandemic it wasn't enough. And we know post-pandemic, it certainly isn't enough. So we really have to rethink and reshape and re-engineer, right, how we support our students. We know that staffing and substitute shortages have resulted in fewer adults in schools. At the very time, students' need for supportive adult relationships has never been greater, right? Coming back from that isolation of remote learning, students are craving relationships, and there's just simply fewer adults there to form those relationships. The impact of the pandemic continues to be dynamic. Kids are okay now, and they're not necessarily okay next month, right? Because things keep shifting. We know there's students whose prior experiences in school might have suggested they might not need enhanced supports, and now they're showing a need. There was some pretty troubling data from the core districts out in California showing that it was kids that were sort of in the middle before are now sort of, picking up a lot of these early indicators when they hadn't in the past. And then finally, we know that students who were furthest from opportunity pre-pandemic live in the communities that in many cases were hardest hit by the pandemic. And the most distressing and just sad and upsetting data point here, right, is we know there's 135,000 students have lost parents. And where those students live is heavily concentrated in areas of sort of low income and segregation and just communities that were cut off already from a lot of society are now more so, right? So we need that systems are needed to let us, monitor things like school connectedness, and we need strategies to bring more adults into schools. We need support systems that are adaptive. We need to progress monitor all students, right? We just can't assume, oh, it's just a subset of students we need to pay attention. We know who they are, right? No, everybody is in these times needs to be, seeing what they need when. And we really need a targeted universalism approach, right, to scaling these new systems and structures. Yes, everybody needs access to them, but we know there are some communities that need it much more. And for example, we know that 4% of districts are where we could find half the kids falling off track to graduation, right? Those are going to be the areas where, and most of those were hardest hit by the pandemic. So that's an area where we need to go first. And what's 4% of districts seems like a small part, and it lets us have a more focused effort than, all districts. But those 4% of districts actually, because they're dense, educate have a quarter of all schools and educate a third of all students. So it means a focused effort in those areas actually reaches a lot of kids, but it reaches the kids sort of most in need of additional supports in order to thrive. And so that's sort of the idea of how with our new systems and structures, we need to have access to all, but also make sure that they're effective or able to get to those areas where there's the greatest number of students, right, that can benefit from them. So with that, we're very excited to have two presentations today of folks that are thinking deep and hard about new ways and better ways and improved ways to create student support structures and systems to do what I showed that other slide says we need to do. This is the answer crew. I get to set up the problem. These guys are the answer. So we're going to begin with the GRAD Partnership for Student Success, a new endeavor you're going to hear about. Sort of one of its first public appearances today. So you're very lucky to be a part of that. And we're going to hear from four great principal folks leading that effort. Jenny from AAR, Angie from the BARR Center, Kelly from the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, and Tara from Talent Development Secondary. And they're going to tell us, give us insight into some ways to build these new systems and structures so we can enable all kids to thrive. So Jenny, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bob. So go ahead and move forward one slide for me, please. So a lot of what Bob just talked about around the need coming out of the pandemic and even recognizing the disparities that took place before the pandemic is really one of the things that grounded this collective group in coming together and taking some claims and making some statements and commitments towards kind of recognizing the need of expanding early warning systems or on-track systems, student success indicators, kind of thinking about the context largely about how we can do this. And we identified some commitments that we had, which was one that were the collective expertise of the group is really important. So you'll see on the right side, all of the organizations that are part of this and participating in it. And we're all really excited about having this collective opportunity to work together to really make sure that our work is focused on equity. So some of what Bob said previously around that. And we want to make sure that our work is really focused with an emphasis on sustainability. And you'll see that on the how side, there are some aspects that we really want to connect to on that sustainability. We're going to be starting at the bottom, thinking about making sure that we have rubrics and self-assessments and a national improvement network in a way that people can have really the ability to grow local expertise for the long term of this, rather than just kind of being someone who comes in, supports, and then leaves. We really want to, and we are committed towards really growing that local expertise. And we really want to make sure that we want to kind of make sure that we continue to get people to support the adoption of early warning systems and make sure that we have different types of technical assistance at different levels, including building capacity of local intermediaries. So this is kind of the big picture of what we're really aiming at of doing, is really kind of having this commitment of a partnership to really partner with communities who are interested in using high quality student success systems so that schools are empowered to graduate all students ready for the future. That's really what our group is focused on. And we're going to talk a little bit on the next slide about what this kind of means. So as we started doing this work, we realized that we needed to have some common understandings of what we're talking about when we're talking about these student success systems or next generation early warning and on-track systems. And through our conversations, we came up with these three kind of key aspects that are really underlying all of the work that we're going to be doing following that. My colleagues are going to be talking more about in a few slides. So we know that this work starts with what's on the left column of using research-based predictive indicators. Based off of our charge and what we're focused on, we're really looking at student outcomes of on-time earned grade promotion, high school graduation, and this post-secondary readiness and attainment aspect. And so that's one thing that we're all saying is really important and committed to, and all of our work is going to be using that. And we're saying that that's not sufficient by itself. And this group in Pathways to Adult Success knows that. We talk about how we've got to do that, and then we need to take action, and that's what's in the middle column. In terms of making sure that there's a team at the school level, local level of teachers or school staff that are using data and taking the time to do analysis of their data so that they can then make sure that there's action. We want to make sure that it's just not that identification, but that we get to that action aspect. And this gets to some of the things Bob just talked about, progress monitoring all students. When we talk about using data, we're including social emotional. We know that this is really important. It's always been important, but it's especially important now. We want to make sure that we're taking the time to get to those root causes so that when we're assigning or providing supports, that we're really addressing those root causes rather than some other symptom. We want to make sure that we're getting to those root causes. We recognize that this aspect in this work needs to be at the strategic action and supports. And that's at the school, grade, classroom, and small group levels, right? This isn't just talking about an individual student at a time. That's part of it, but we want to get to that strategic action supports to have that larger impact that we know we need to have. At the same time, we want to walk the talk, so we're going to evaluate our own impact. This gets to some of those creating rubrics, self-assessments, looking at how our work is doing, getting feedback from our partners, from people that we're partnering with, having the opportunity to really have that continuous improvement be part of our work from the get-go, and that we recognize that we're going to have to adapt actions. We're all tired of the unprecedented times phrase. And yet that means that we're going to have to keep making adaptations until we really are supporting students, groups of students along the way. So that's kind of this middle area in terms of the what we do with the data. We want to get to that analysis and taking action. We also know in this third column that we can't do this work unless we really are explicit about this work can require shifts in outlook and approaches and mindsets. And so we wanted to be really crystal clear about this. This was a critical component as we thought about early warning systems and the next generation, that we wanted to be really explicit about this. We want to make sure that we're being preventative and not reactive. We're really committed to this strength and asset approach. We know that that's really critical and important, particularly as we're talking about building relationships and working in local communities. We want to be empathetic and not stigmatizing. We want to make sure that we're really approaching our work with a lens to equity, but also not just in terms of our actions in terms of how we're talking with schools and districts and states about equity, but our own actions as well. We know that that's important. And so we have this commitment that we've been explicit to around educators' role is ensuring student success. We know that's important. Belief in educator and student agency, the using of data, and organizing for school improvement. These are kind of developed, agreed mindsets that all of the organizations know that all three of these kind of columns kind of become the three-legged stool of the work that our early warning systems and the next generation of what we're hoping to do so that students are graduating on that pathway for post-secondary success. I'm going to pass it to Tara, who's going to talk a little bit more explicitly about some of our goals. Tara.
Thank you. Yes, we're, as you see here on the slide, just strengthening existing systems and then responding to what we're seeing and learning from the pandemic and how our students are experiencing that are two of the big goals and how we're thinking about our work. And we can go ahead to the next one. And so, is this me? I think this one's me, yes. This is why we're doing this work now. And Bob really did a great job setting that context and sharing some of that data from that Chalkbeat article. But really, we know that we need to be using on track student success systems so that we can get to higher rates of graduation, and to be able to do that now with efficiency is even more critical than it was in the past. And we can go ahead to the next one.
I think this is me. So I'm Angie Jarbeck. I'm from the BARR Center. And once again, I appreciate the frame why we're coming together. I think there's some critical pieces. One, we know we can do more when we work together. I think the other thing that we've really learned is that when staff work together in coordination in terms of betterment of the students do better. And we know the same thing holds true with organizations, that if we can work collectively as organizations that are all doing this work, we all have shared aims, we all have shared commitments to high quality and evidence-based things, we know that the impact we're going to have for the entire group is so much more than we're going to have individually. So it's a really exciting time to kind of have everyone come together to do this work. This other piece is we all have a deep commitment to equity. And I think that once again, when we're naming that and we're moving that forward, I'm going to share kind of briefly how BARR Center names equity, but I feel like it's a shared piece that we really believe that each and every student, regardless of race, ethnicity, or economic status, deserves a high quality education where adults know them, recognize their strengths, and help them thrive personally as well as academically. And even though that's like stated in some of our language, I feel like that's something that we're all living, that we're like, this is every kid. This isn't, a group of students, and that we need to have them thrive in kind of a variety of ways. Next slide is the how. How are we going to actually kind of achieve these goals? So we've got it in these kind of 4 different categories, which we're going to give a brief preview of. But one is going to be kind of awareness and advocacy of like making sure that people are even aware of this. Next is really talking about creation of tools. Then how do we scale these on-track systems in kind of key districts that people look to see the impacts? And then what does the infrastructure look like? So that's kind of the preview. And then I'll talk briefly about the next slide, which is some of the work that we're really kind of leaning into, which is this kind of broad awareness. And so one of the things that we're really kind of looking at is, first of all, having a shared understanding, having a shared vocabulary. How can we make sure that we're all at least kind of, speaking kind of to the same kind of goals? The other piece is let's identify and highlight places that it's going well. Because I think that one of the things that's really important is that concurrent with showing the data, we have to be able to have lived experiences and voices come forward with all the noise and be able to highlight those that are really doing well, kind of with our goal consistently being to get more systems working this way, because we know it not only serves students better, but the reality is it serves the staff better. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to be learning about and talking about is how do we equip the staff that are doing this incredible work with systems that they can really be effective so they're able to serve students well. And with that, Tara, I'm going to give you the next slide again.
Thanks. So for the second driver or aspect of our work is really creating supports that can be useful for those of you that we serve directly. And so some of those are going to include also curating existing resources for early warning systems. If you've ever sort of Googled it or On Track, there's a lot out there. There's a wide body of existing materials, and we're working to put that all in one place and organize it in a way that's very user-friendly, so that it's not overwhelming. So once we have that sort of shared definition and high quality, and what do we mean by high quality as a group, and as a collaborative organization, creating tools that'll be useful to those of us in the schools and to the intermediaries that we are hoping to engage as well in the communities. So for this driver, this is one where we're really going to need a lot of support and input from those that we serve, because we're designing tools for people in roles that we don't own and have at this moment. So we definitely are looking forward to working together to seek input on some of the tools and the definitions of high quality that we will be creating under driver 2. We can go ahead to driver 3.
Thanks, Tara. So here's where we are going to be continuing to build on what's come out of the prior 2 drivers, where driver 3 is really focused on scaling. And so we want to build capacity and provide direct scaling. And so we said that we would extend our existing capacity of experienced TA providers, which also includes everyone on this call today, and then also enable 30 to 50 key school districts to move towards high quality on-track systems as part of their pandemic recovery work. So one of the things that we'll be talking about later on is how you can get involved and how you can support this. But really, we recognize that there are groups like you all that are doing work that might benefit from the opportunity to talk with others, that might be interested in using some of those resources and providing more feedback on those resources. And that's where we wanted to provide kind of this direct scale aspect. And then we also want to make sure that we are really building the local intermediary capacity. So as we're working in key districts, we're going to figure out who the right local intermediary is. It might be a regional education provider, it could be a district itself, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a community organization. But we want to then make sure that we're able to train and support that local intermediary and give them a scaffolded approach to it, so that we're really making sure over time that we're really supporting their expertise and their capacity to be able to continue providing work, so that this high quality on-track system work can extend beyond the life of our work together. So this means that we're going to be partnering with some key districts in terms of building new relationships or building on existing relationships to make sure that we're able to really do some of that direct scale. It means that we're going to be making sure that we figure out how we can get people who are currently doing this work involved in some of that as well. And then we're also going to make sure that we are creating the resources building off of what people are saying in the field that are specific towards this local intermediary needs, so that they have the resources that they need to be able to continue to do the work and really make sure that that on-track work remains high quality within those local areas where they've got the rapport and the relationships. And then Kelly's going to talk about the final driver.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so we know that our current work, we're targeting these, as Bob mentioned, these 4% of districts nationally, but our ambition and our aims are to grow this work to 75% of the districts nationally, and take it from being new to the new normal ways that these things work. And for that to happen, we need an infrastructure to support both the improvement of existing networks and existing work that's happening in districts and in schools, but also for the sustainability of this kind of new ways in which high quality systems can continuously improve upon the work that they're doing. So to do that, we have some key components of an infrastructure that we think could help enable that scaling and the sustainability of this work, including establishing a national improvement network. We're hoping to develop a digital learning platform to enable people to learn widespread training and learning about this high quality work. We're also hoping to create and establish an improvement data set so that we're able to identify and learn from success. And then lastly, enable certification and credentialing of key roles in student success systems. And so this piece is probably a little bit of the coming soon to a neighborhood near you. So this work is all sort of emerging, but is work that we're working towards, and we're excited to, as Bob mentioned, this is one of our first times talking about some of this, but we look forward to hearing from you. And there's also ways in which you can participate. So if we can look to the next slide. So we're hoping to engage larger communities in this work with us. So how might you be able to do that if you're interested in telling other people about it because you think they could also benefit from partnering with us or working with us, or we could benefit from working with them. So we're hoping to find and work with districts and schools. So we're looking for partners in this work, as others have mentioned. And so places that are interested in both implementing or working and sustaining these high quality student success systems. So expanding on some they may have in place. And that could be middle and high schools. And we're hoping to work in both those in order to empower so that all students are able to graduate ready for the future. And to support this, we have multiple types of expertise, which is also, Angela mentioned this, why are we coming together? This group is drawing on lots of types of technical expertise and assistance that can be provided, and we can tailor that to the needs of the schools and the districts that we may be working with. We're also hoping, as Jenny mentioned, to work directly with intermediaries and community organizations to increase their capacity to support the implementation of this. And we're hoping that that too is a way in which we can start to spread the word and advocate the use of these high quality early warning systems and some of the materials and resources that we're going to be curating and bringing together. And then lastly, ways to partner with us. There's kind of two ways that we're looking for. One is we're looking for advising partners. So people who, have been doing some of this work and want to help and give us feedback on the rubrics and the guidance and the self-assessments that we're creating. We're also hoping to draw on your expertise and the things that you've been doing to advise us about nominating schools that are implementing high quality systems, some of those bright spots that are happening around the country that we want to start to elevate that work so that we can learn from it. And then also be potential partners and join this future national network that we're hoping to establish. And then we're looking for communication partners. So those that, perhaps may not be in a place that want to do some of this other advising or joining the national network, but are interested in spreading the word. We really want to have partners in that. And so we welcome people to become communicating partners with us. The way to get in touch with us. So the next slide, we have some exciting news. We have an email address that you can reach, and I believe that Anne is going to drop that in the chat for you. So if you're interested in learning more or in partnering with us or joining us in this work, please feel free to send us an email at this at this email address. And then we also have a website, although we're still early in the early days. So there's a site there, and this may be something that you come back to later on to find more information, but you can take that link and keep checking back because we're in the midst of building what will be on there. But we'd love to hear from you even in these early days. So please reach out. And one final future thing that we can see is that this group, we will be presenting our future work as this is still emerging and evolving, and we're taking it on the road. And we will be at the Carnegie Summit, which is taking place in San Diego, California as of now. And that will be March 27th to the 29th. And so please come join us there. There's lots of reasons, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody who's interested in learning more about the Carnegie Summit, but that's where this group will be presenting our emerging work going forward by March, what we have by March. So with that, we've said a lot at you. We'd like to open it up for questions. And I think if you can drop those in the chat, or if you want to unmute, I'm not sure. I think it's okay to unmute, but we welcome to hear, questions, comments, or what's coming up for you.
Ellis Ott from Fairbanks, Alaska. I guess I could start off. And I might be off topic a little bit, but I do think it's pertinent when we're talking about early warning systems or advanced early warning systems or on-track systems, is that in these pandemic impacted years, it's also dramatically impacted our metrics. So I'll give you an example. I'm in the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District, and fourth quarter 1920 school year, we went immediately to remote learning. And during that time period, we had 0 reported dropouts. So during that time period, essentially, we just kind of lost track of students, so to speak. And I warned my school district. I said, we're gonna show a dropout rate that's lower than we've ever seen it in this year, but that's a false one that occurred because of our traditional methods of tracking this kind of information was essentially broken or bent by our circumstances. And I said, expect this to go up the following year when we realized those students that we didn't realize had actually dropped out had. And I imagine that little circumstance would also impact our graduation rates, where we were having challenges tracking students, because there's a key component in assessing dropout rates as well as graduation rates, and that's tracking students. For example, has the student transferred to a different school district or a different state? And we have to be on point to make sure we're accurate about that. And the accuracy of that, I think, has been diminished, especially when students are in remote learning. I imagine we were just kind of building the plane as we flew kind of situation, where for a whole semester in last year, 2021, we were all remote learning for our particular school district, but I imagine it's probably similar in other school districts and or states across the nation during these time periods, and likely would have similar issues. There's other measures that are impacted, attendance. I mean, we had big discussions around attendance in my state of how we're going to handle that in remote learning. And we kind of settled on, you can't do this equitably or measure this in a reliable, valid way. And we kind of settled on saying, we're just going to have to say students are 100% in attendance during this time period. Because some of the ideas that they came up with, we said, you're not going to be able to do that in a, consistent way, such that you could trust that you could accurately compare schools amongst one another, school districts amongst one another across our state. That's just one measure. Another measures are state assessments. We didn't even, our state assessment was canceled in 1920. In 2021, we did have testing, but our participation rate was dramatically lower than normal. And so my technical advisory committee, which I'm a part of for our state, we had a long discussion about just handling that, to say, how are we going to report on this? Do we need to be really cautious and put a bunch of, exclamation points and caveats with it to say, we had substantially lower participation rate than normal. And so you need to be really careful about how you interpret these proficiency rates, because especially if you're in remote learning. In second semester last year, we went to in person, but we had it be optional, and proportions of students were still in remote learning and others went in person, and that decision dramatically impacted whether they were going to participate in the state assessment in spring of 2021. And so a lot of these metrics that we're using pretty exclusively for early warning systems are all impacted, almost all of them, I would say. So I think that's another kind of wrench in the system to try and assess. Like I've written what I would call an advanced early warning system, because I put in essentially multivariate models to do it, but I'm painfully aware of how some of these measures that I can, traditionally rely on aren't as stable in these time periods. So it's just something to consider when you're thinking about this. And maybe it's something that, like, as time moves forward, we can rely better or rely more on these measures to do these kinds of early warning systems in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight from the field. Other questions? And we'll wait for their questions. I just have one for the GRAD Partnership team. You sort of stress high quality. I'm just wondering if one or two things in your view that sort of distinguish a high quality system from perhaps, because we know one part of the challenge of early warnings, they sort of had organic growth on their own over time. And some people started these way back in 2007, 8, 9. And then there's been new development since then, but maybe when they did it, it was one thing, and now it's shifted to slightly different. So what are some of the cornerstones were thinking about as far as what defines high quality?
Bob, I'll go in first. I think that the organizations that are convened have been deeply committed to evidence. So having a research base behind their work, being able to show historical effectiveness. But I think to your point, Ellis, I really want to acknowledge being responsive to the current field. I feel like that's also necessary in this definition of high quality. So I think having a system that we know historically worked, but also making sure that we are being really aware of how the context has changed and what are those metrics. And once again, how are they recalibrating both during this time as well as going forward? But I would think those are kind of shared beliefs when we're looking at high quality.
Thanks. Anne, do we have any questions in the chat we haven't covered?
No.
Okay. All right, well, we'll have time to return to this at the end, but now I want to just pivot to our second presentation because these two fit together hand in glove. And in our first presentation, we were really talking about on-track early warning student success systems, creating systems to help us be proactive and not reactive and sort of strategic and systematic and figuring out what support students need when. But a critical feature underlying a lot of the supports we know students need is having the human capital and the people to provide them. And as I said in my introduction, one reason why there's been so much sort of stress and tension in schools this fall is because we had fewer adults and more kids in need of adult relationships. So our second speaker presentation, Jonathan Mathis from City Year, is going to share with us some thinking that they've been doing with some others on how to create sort of a new type of student support person to help solve this person power challenge of how do we provide all our students with the supports they need to thrive. So Jonathan, we turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you to the colleagues who just finished the presentation. A pleasure to be with you. As we get started, for over 30 years, City Year has partnered with AmeriCorps to provide people-powered student supports in schools across the nation, focused on advancing educational equity. And as we look to this current year, the City Year footprint reaches 20 states, and within those 20 states, 29 total cities. And our work reaches about 345 schools. So just to give you an idea of our current footprint before we lean in. So I'd love to move to our next slide. As we're thinking about the work of advancing educational equity, we recognize that there is a gap between what schools are designed to provide and what students need to succeed, as Bob said, pre-pandemic, right? What we were doing then wasn't enough. So even now, the need of support in school and certainly direct support to students is absolutely critical. So we think about the work in systemically under-resourced communities and how students are likely to experience greater adversity that is interfering with their learning and their readiness to learn, right? Just arriving to school and feeling a sense of belonging and connection. And that speaks to the relationships and supports that the school community would offer so that students are feeling grounded in their school experience. They have supportive developmental relationships that supports their thriving. And as we look to the next slide, and I'll move through this quickly, Bob has done a great job sharing with us already the context, but as we think about the student success coach framework, we're looking specifically at the social, emotional learning and academic development together. So academic attrition, attendance, and SEL factors and data points that continue to emerge in the COVID time continues to underscore the tremendous need of students across the country. So this slide shares a few data points. But on the next slide, there's some narrative pieces here that I'd love to string together with just a simple sentence. Across the country, we continue to see feelings of sadness, students experiencing harm, students delivering negative behaviors in schools without the human capital, support resources necessary to address students' needs, right? If you look across these 4 points of data, that statement becomes even more impactful. So on the next slide, I'll begin to frame this first segment of my talk with you this day, really defining what is the student success coach and sharing with you what that looks like in practice, as well as some impact indicators and elements of a long-term vision. So this next slide explicitly says that when we think about student success coaches at City Year, we're thinking about near peers, right? Young people, AmeriCorps members serving full-time, and they are diverse teams, again, serving in systemically under-resourced schools. And their key focus is on forming developmental relationships and partnering with teachers, partnering with school counselors and school leaders to provide near-peer, evidence-based social, emotional, and academic supports directly to students or even in small groups, while also creating a positive learning community for the entire school. So in practice, there's a whole school support level where student success coaches are leading whole school activities to build belonging and to engage families. And the student success coach is woven into the fabric of the school in terms of the culture before, during, and in some cases, the after-school programming that happens at the local level. When we think about the work at the classroom level, the student success coach is supporting the educator in real time with classroom routines and building community. But also this gives the teacher an opportunity to have even greater flexible capacity in personalizing learning and even bringing together smaller groups of students who may need additional support for the instruction that is occurring in the moment, or instruction that is going to firm up some core competency and skills that students would like, what teachers would like to see students focus on in small groups. And that gets to the individual student support. The student success coach not only helps with instruction, right? We're thinking about the marrying of the social, emotional, and the academic together, as well as getting students to school, right? Supporting with attendance and engagement, while also showing and sharing with students how they can be their best self-advocate, how they may use their voice to share and communicate their needs to the teacher as well as to their peers. This next slide shows the alignment between the student success coach framework and the whole child design for equity, right? So we're again looking at positive developmental relationships and the use of near peer for those developmental relationships. When we think about environments that foster feelings of safety and belonging, the student success coach is working closely with families and students to create that connective tissue. And we see that even more so now with our colleagues at the New York City site, where City Year New York City is instrumental in the delivery of the community schools experience in a number of schools, right? So we're thinking about that connective tissue between family, student, as well as the larger community around the student's needs. Excuse me. And the last 3 points, the rich learning experience, the development of skills and habits, and the integrated student support systems, again, show this really intentional alignment between the student success coach framework and what we know to be true for the science of learning development. As we move to this next slide, I'd love to share with you just briefly, and certainly can follow up during discussion around some of the impact measures. But what we know to be true thus far is that schools that partner with student success coaches are up to 2 to 3 times more likely to see improvement in English and math. When we think about the marrying of the social, emotional, and academic outcomes and attendance outcomes, we see that the more students spend time with their student success coach, especially students who are the furthest behind, the greatest gains are occurring when the social emotional skill building is combined with academic activity, and being really intentional about that holistic growth between social emotional and academic. The other piece, as you heard me mention in the last piece, I'll speak to briefly, and that's about student voice. In a recent survey, 84%, overwhelming majority of students said that they feel that their student success coach, this near peer mentor, academic tutor support, additional capacity in school, is teaching students how to self-advocate, how to ask for the support that they need, as well as modeling critical skills for success in the classroom and beyond. So as we look to this next slide, this is where we really lean into, if we're looking beyond City Year's footprint, or as we want to codify and articulate what is the essence of the student success coach, we partnered with Intentional Futures to do a research project that has distilled for us 6 required drivers for effective student success coaching programs. Again, you've already seen in that previous slide, the alignment between the science of learning development and certainly what that looks like at the whole school, classroom, and individual level. But these 6 drivers serve as guiding light for all of our programs and certainly how we wish to engage the greater field in replication and expansion considerations. First, we have the authentic coach and student relationship, and you've heard me speak about the near peer, the genuine care, the trust and belonging. The second driver, as you see listed here, is just the importance of data-informed programming and partnership. How do we continue to monitor student success and monitor students who might benefit from support on that one-to-one or small group, while still looking at the data for the whole school in support of the teacher and other educators? The diverse group of skilled coaching, again, this is where we think about the partnership with AmeriCorps and our recruitment process and even career trajectories. We think a lot about the pipeline as student success coaches are serving. How do we keep them connected to the greater education ecosystem? How do we keep them connected to the desire to have an impact in the classroom? And a part of that is seen in this 4th driver with ongoing learning and development. Our student success coaches have a year-long learning and development experience that includes key facets of the delivery of the program, as well as how they continue to grow and learn and receive feedback on their performance, as well as mental and emotional health, serving in historically and systemically under-resourced schools and communities where trauma may be commonplace. The 5th piece here is around the integration of the work of the student success coach and the holistic support. And this speaks to the teacher collaboration, the engagement of core members and staff members in the school, as well as the social emotional learning, skill development that will happen in the classroom, but also throughout the whole school experience. And this last piece, again, highlights the way we deliver the program in partnership with AmeriCorps, but certainly focusing on positive youth development and being responsive at the local level. So on the next slide, and I'll just speak to this briefly, the long-term vision here is that one day, hopefully soon, the student success coach will be a recognized critical capacity. There would be tremendous partnership between educators and student success coaches, such that the student success coach aspires to return to the classroom as a future educator. With that, there's tremendous support at the local level or federal or state level for public funds and private funds to support the demand and the sustainability. And I will move to the next slide. Actually, you can click one more. As we think about the work, and as Bob mentioned, the 4% of school districts, this is where we are focused. This is where we should start first. This is our chance to, as Bob mentioned, to reach the students who have the greatest need, right? If we focus on the 4% of districts, we can maximize the investment here and certainly continue to contextualize the approach to best support the local needs of students and families. And if we click ahead one more slide, when we talk about the 4%, we see that there is pretty solid distribution across large city, medium cities, suburban communities. Again, that 4% of districts, if we focus on where there's the greatest percentage of non-graduates, and we identify and ensure sustainability of resources, we can have tremendous impact for student achievement, student success. Outside of the 4% of districts, 2 other areas that I'll end with. One is around policy. On this next slide, we've looked at 4 key policy areas, state policy criteria for the conditions needed for the success of the student success coach framework. And those policy areas include mentoring and tutoring. In particular, are states funding or encouraging mentoring and tutoring programs or initiatives? And again, what we're looking at is that combination of social emotional learning and academic support. When we look at the whole child approaches, one of the questions we continue to ask, where might there be state interest investment in social emotional learning programs, statewide standards or initiatives that would support the work of student success coaches. As you heard me mention at the start, we are partnering with AmeriCorps, so we are also looking to see how might states provide even greater incentives or funding that would ensure the sustainability of the work of a student success coach, and how might state service commissions have a focus, relationship or strategic partnership with the state education agency. And lastly, as we think about the long-term view of this, the necessary for the student support, we're thinking about the pipeline for human capital in terms of teachers. Might there be particular pathways, programs, or alternative routes to certification for educators in this work? So as we move to this last slide, I'd love to just underscore, as we think about the expansion of student success coaching and the support for even greater programs that are doing this work, we've done a program landscape analysis that helps us to surface some areas for collaborative learning, right? How do we find the individuals to serve as student success coaches? What data might we continue to use to inform, and even what infrastructure might be necessary to inform the impact of the work? But if we think about program and practice, how do we ensure core competencies are standardized across student success coach programs? And how do we surface even greater strategy for the work directly with students around identity and agency, and also approaches that support the social, emotional, and academic development? And lastly, this collaborative learning again leads to how might the student success coach, this intentional value add capacity, become critical contributors to future educator pipelines, whether they're serving in the classroom as teachers or in the school community as counselors and or leaders. On my last slide, prior to opening the floor for question, our key implications here for scaling the high quality student success coach approach, again, point back to leaning into the 4% of districts so that we can have the greatest impact, while also sharing the codified support model and program model across unique communities and creating learning communities to advance this framework. And by doing that, we're building it and advancing this continuous improvement approach so that we can continue to refine the student success coach model to be adaptive and responsive to local needs. And lastly, as we think about and continue to lean into, well, what do we do now and next? We continue to think about, well, what does training and technical assistance look like to support organizations and school districts that might be interested in implementing and adapting a student success coach program to meet and exceed the needs of their students and community. And with that, I will turn it back to Bob or open the floor for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So please ask your questions in the chat or take yourself off mute and ask directly. And while you're doing that, I'll just start off with a question, which is, you know, Jonathan, one thing I think we all wonder about is that, you know, on one hand, very privileged folks have coaches. So all, you know, elite athletes have coaches, multiple coaches often. CEOs have executive coaches. These are seen as a badge of honor. They're not seen as like, oh, you need remediation. But sometimes there's a hesitancy to give, you know, those that are furthest from opportunity a coach, right? Because it's like, well, you know, it should be solved other ways. So what do you think it's going to take to sort of change sort of a public perception or public views of just like that at some level coaching should be, you know, the argument is everywhere. Like everyone needs coaching at some point. And we know that particularly to succeed in school, particularly if you come through a lot of adversity, right? Success coaching can be a very powerful tool. But in order to sort of make that normative, right, there has to just be almost a mindset shift, I think, to the value of coaching. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on what it might take to get us there.
You know, thank you, Bob. I was in a board meeting last night for an organization. I serve on their board, and we talked about coaching in a similar vein. And what it boiled down for that conversation, and even in the framing for this space is when we're leaning into equity, right, and advancing educational equity, I think we really should be sure to articulate a common understanding as to what we mean by equity and what we're willing to do. Equity requires choice and action. And if we're centering around the notion of coaching in spaces where there is the greatest need, some of the need is relationship, consistency, structure, opportunity, the fictive kin, right? We look at, even in the college admission space, the power of an advisor, someone who may share the same identity in some facet, that has a power to reach a student and keep a student engaged and help a student find their voice or feel a sense of belonging, far greater than many educators may be able to do in that moment, especially if the demand on an educator is 30 students in the classroom at a particular moment. But it also speaks to self-efficacy, right? We think about the power of example, the power of, that vulnerability of one sharing their story and finding a sense of connection. From the equitable approach, I think whatever we need to do to ensure student success, any and every avenue should be explored, especially in the urgency of now. But even in the conversation last night, we centered around equity. What does it take? What is needed to ensure that every student has the same outcome? And how do we ensure we're all aligned with that expectation and the action and choice that comes with it?
Great, thanks. So Anne,
Bob, we've got several questions in the chat. Lynn Sachs shared some helpful links from Ed Redesign on student success planning, and she asks the question, could you say more about the New York City Partnership Community Schools, since that seems like a great merging of coaching and more comprehensive supports? I'll ask two more questions at the same time since we're running short of time. Ellis asks, how are students identified for support from a coach? And Pam Sibbons, are any of the metrics you are collecting and analyzing to do with students building networks and social capital? How are you measuring success if you are indeed collecting this information on students' networks and social capital?
And I will try to tie a response to all three. Happy to have a more direct conversation about the New York City Community Schools work and connect you to colleagues in our City Year New York office. Lynn, in short, the City Year team is serving as lead partner with community schools in New York City. Not only are we delivering this community schools model in terms of the comprehensive support, to Bob's point, the need for people power student support is unique to City Year, and that makes our work in New York City and the community schools, that differentiates our approach for community schools versus some of the more traditional approaches to service delivery. And in terms of, Ellis, your question around how are students identified, we point back to many of the same indicators that we've already spoke to, right? Attendance, behavior, course performance, but also the student success coach is woven so much into the fabric of the school. We hope that the coaches, as they serve in teams of 10, are impacting the entire school community. And then when they're in the classroom and working with teachers, it could be a direct sort of ask of educator to the student success coach, or the key data points that would help a student, that would help a coach identify students who to work with at the individual or the small group. And lastly, social capital. I would certainly love to come back to that question, Pamela. Where we are really focused on a student agency and voice, and that was a data point that I shared in the impact, but happy to circle back in the interest of time.
Jonathan, we have a few more minutes. You can answer that a little more fully if you want.
Okay,
I saw
sorry.
one more question come in too, so yeah.
Oh, great, sorry, I'm timing myself.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about social capital, I certainly would love to spend some time with our team, but as I mentioned, student agency, as we're thinking about student success coach, again, we want to have the engagement between this near peer coach and student to be one that prepares the student for success beyond the classroom. So some of the social capital could be, in fact, because of the relationship, because of the dialogue, because of the relationship building between the student and coach. So if that is captured, it would be more so anecdotal outside of the question on agency. That is one of the impact measures that I shared before. In terms of how we're measuring success, generally outside of the social capital piece that you've posed, again, looking at attendance, academic achievement, academic growth, and then also to the point that I shared, the agency, the student anecdote around their feeling, sense of belonging, some of the social emotional indicators that would be a part of engaging in the coaching experience and relationship.
Thanks. And then
One
Andrew.
more question from Garrett. Are the student success coaches strictly provided by city, or can faculty, staff, and even students or parents be trained as SSCs?
Great question. So as City Year delivers the Student Success Coach program in schools, we're partnering with AmeriCorps members who are serving 1 or 2 years of service directly as a student success coach. So that is an avenue for support. The student success coach is not meant to displace any professional in the school building. So we're working in concert with faculty and staff. And we do see, a number of student success coaches who are graduating from high school, who are serving in communities where they also attended school. So largely they would be, a high school completer who is looking to provide 1 to 2 years of service before continuing on to career or college. So that's where we would see, potential alum of the secondary school or the learning community serving, but not simultaneous.
Right. And Jonathan, just to add to that, because I think the spirit of Garrett's question which you spoke to, is that as the student success concept becomes a more broadly applied concept and happens in areas beyond where City Year is, there is assumption that a range of folks potentially could serve as student success coaches. Some of the models you showed included like college students or, serving while they were still in college. And there's different potentialities for who plays that role of student success coach.
Absolutely.
As long as they meet sort of the quality dimensions that you sort of outlined.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right. So with that, I just want to bring us to our closing segment. So go back one. Sorry, go back. If folks have resources or ideas to share on the bigger topic, right? What new structures and systems do we need to sort of allow us to re-engineer how we support students in pandemic impacted times, and so they, that we can all thrive? And just what I would, the thought I'd like to leave us with, if you think of across the 2 presentations, at some level, they both have the same goal and hope thereafter, which is that we can collectively organize how we support our students to be in a much more proactive, strategic, adaptive way. Right? If you think about it, right, our traditional response pre-pandemic is typically we often waited to provide student supports until a student failed a class, got suspended, or went to truancy court. And then we were in sort of these sort of last ditch remediation recovery strategies. And really what we're trying to move to in the arguments both these folks are thinking about it, creating new systems and structures, is that no, we want it to be when a kid shows up in a middle and high school everywhere, but in particular though in areas of sort of high adversity and sort of challenge, that there is a well-functioning student support success system in place that is proactive, that is adaptive, that is constantly seeking to be strategic and figuring out how can we create an environment where kids are not falling off track and are recovering, and they're staying on track from the day they enter the school, and they feel connected and they're thriving. And then we're saying, and they're greeted there, not only by their teachers and not only by the school staff, but by student success coaches who can make sure that every student has those strong adult relationships and those near peer relationships and is able to develop their voice. And that's really the proactive, adaptive thing we're making the argument that should just be foundational. That should just be how schools are organized. It shouldn't be some new idea or something that we're trying to put in a few places. And the reason we're confident in saying that is we know that all of these approaches have been tested for a decade or more, right? And they all show strong evidence of impact. So it's really figuring about how to take what we know works and making it just part of school and not a special thing that's in a few places on a short-term funded grant program that some kids get for some time. And really, how do we create these systems and engineer it so all kids get what they need to sort of have a full thriving future. So that's really the thing that ties all of this discussion together and really challenges all to collectively think how to keep re-engineering the system. So that's the norm and not the exception. So with that, I would invite people to share in their chat resources or ideas that speak to that. And then as we do, I'd just like to point out that we have our monthly forums will continue. We encourage people to sign up for those. And also, if you want to present, so let us know. We're looking for good presenters as well that are along our continuum of early warning, navigation systems, post-secondary pathways and collaborations. And with that, I will take us to, I want to thank you. I want to really thank our presenters today, our GRAD Partnership team, our City Year team, for really sharing some really great ideas and thinking and strategies and how to really create these systems we need. I wish we all be well and we all are onward. Thank you.